say, I think there's a slight risk here that we're talking about offshoring as in a British company letting a contract to a group that's based overseas. But for me, offshoring is one example of a globalization movement here. And many of the instances I see of work which is moved from the UK to another country happens because people are working in a big multinational company. And where is onshore and where is offshore there? So I think there is potentially a piece of work that can be done around techniques and standards for managing offshoring as is commonly understood, which is, UK company letting contract to another country. But there is something which will affect probably very, very many people in the UK, which is how to work in a global setting, how to work when perhaps the majority of your customers are not in the UK. I mean, I think we were talking earlier of the vast numbers, the huge potential market that exists in Asia, and how could very well be the case that many of our companies, most of their customers will not be in the UK in the future. All this kind of richness of how we work in a globalized setting is what I think we need to understand, to train people for, and yes, to set professional standards for whenever we can.
I think that's right. And this is why I say a lot of this is about having some level of common language for skills and resources, but it's mostly about relationships. And this was brought home to me some 20 years ago when I worked for Rakel Electronics. Rakel Electronics was headquarters in Bracknell. I was working in Hook, which is about 20 minutes drive from Bracknell, but my headquarters was in Florida. So we had an American company owned by a British company with a UK subsidiary, and the American company had a UK subsidiary. Now, you learn a lot about the complexity of corporate relationships when you're in that kind of scenario, and it is all about the relationships.
And I had also, a European operation for a consultancy, which was based in the US. And it's exactly the same thing. And funnily enough, then the delivery center was offshore in India and China. And so you had this global relationship, and my closest report at that point was in Boston. So you have we are a chain. We are a link. And you're quite right when you say, this is going to be determining. And I think our unwillingness to look abroad in terms of maybe because we're afraid our jobs will go abroad actually closes our eyes to the opportunities that are there as well. And there was a report the other day, I don't know where I read it, possibly The Economist, which said, well, the UK has not expanded as much into Asia as other countries. The US, for instance, has been offshoring for years. They've been, going there every month, every 2 months. They're integrated far more into the Indian subcontinent than we are. And I think there is a huge market out there, absolutely huge. It's just we have no idea how to tap it.
Well, I think it's interesting, the points that have been brought out here now, and I think it leads rather neatly back to the final little point I had here that I wanted to discuss, which is what is the BCS's role as an institute for IT here? Because, as John mentioned, these cultural issues, they're much larger than IT. They actually apply to anything that's offshored, don't they? And having the global mindset is also bigger than IT. So should we have an official position as an institute? You're all members, obviously, Elizabeth, you're our past president. Should we have an official position, or is there an approach we should be taking to help with the mindset? What is our role?
I wonder if we should have a position, but not a position on outsourcing, because that's been around for 15 years already. What we need to have is a position on encouraging a policy of having the ability to work remotely, because then it doesn't matter whether it's outsourced to somewhere else in Europe, in Asia, or Scotland, or wherever. It's one of the challenges I've struggled with in getting buy-in with whether it be outsourcing or even simply people working from home. It's the culture shift of people accepting how productive other people can be when they're not in the office. And it doesn't matter where that office is. Ultimately, it was illustrated with the Rakel example. But that's the place we need to be. If we can come up with a position statement on how effective remote working is, then that then solves part of the outsourcing issue. It resolves some of the issues about how do you actually make UK IT people potentially more productive and, you know, make them more competitive salary-wise as well. You know, at the moment, if you live and work in central London, then your salary necessarily carries a premium because the cost of how expensive it is to live in London. If you live in Liverpool or Newcastle or something, the cost of living is so much lower there, it actually means potentially you could afford a slightly lower salary. That starts making us more competitive on the international market.
And I think on the European continent, they have a much more insular view of working in Asia and working globally. And one thing that the UK has always been really good at, we've been excellent at redefining ourselves and being able to reinvent ourselves. Again and again, historically, we are inventors. And I think we need to take this inventive spirit and take it out there because, you know, Germany, Spain, France, the Nordic countries, all of this sort of skill in being able to take and to work with multiple teams and to teach it and to show companies how to use it is going to be extremely valuable in the years to come. I think that is a real opportunity for IT in particular, where that is where the growth area is going to be. You know, learn how to do it, be involved in these projects. Throw yourself in because it is going to give you a leg up and enable you to work internationally.
Yes, I think there's wisdom in that, and I think it's back to this discussion about developing a culture in IT where the professionals network. And I think Sophia is a good start point for a common language for skills, as I said earlier. But I do think there is a sense in which we have to try and get people to understand that offshoring is not about I do this to you. This is about we join a network. And getting that mindset to change is not trivial. But I do think the BCS is well placed with its relationships with educators and with, if you like, policymakers in industry in general to start driving that sort of message through. And I do think it's a very important message. And I mean, if you want to see an example of a whole change of industry, then you can look back at the experience of the steel industry, for example. It's only 20 years since we were a major steel producer and employer, and all of the major steel works in the UK were UK owned. Towards the end of 2007, Sheffield was producing more steel than it ever had. But it was basically two guys and a computer in a shed. So, you know, the employment simply wasn't there. Now, Tata own most of the steel. And guess which country they're based in? India. So we have to learn to adapt and join the network. And that's the way we adapt and survive.
I think there is a huge demand for, even in India and China, for experience in being able to access the sort of the industrial market or the commercial market in the UK and in Europe in general. I think Europe is seen by Asia as largely untapped. And I think, you know, getting these skills and the same thing, this is going to happen, you know, whether you like it or not, this is going to happen. I think you mentioned a thing about globalization. I absolutely agree. And I think the best thing we can do is actually leverage it, you know, make it work for us.
Elizabeth, how do you see BCS's role?
I think BCS is already more of a global organisation than many people realise. Mm-hmm. 1 in 7 of our members already is based overseas. So it is interesting that even now we're becoming much more global in our outlook. I think for an organisation generally that's something that we need to develop and build upon. I'm sure that we have a role in terms of professionalism, in contributing to the setting of standards. We have a great deal of experience in this country compared to many countries around the world. I think that's something we can build on and grow. In terms of helping those that are based in the UK, I think we can help them through our education policies, working with government and so on. And I think importantly, and for me very importantly, we can always challenge the myth that comes out sometimes in a Daily Mail article or whatever, that the UK no longer
Other papers are
has.
available.
Yes, the UK no longer needs any IT professionals or IT industry. It's all moved to China and India. That is absolutely wrong.
Yes.
To completely undermine and undervalue the tremendous industries we've got in certain sectors in particular. And I think the fact that simply the number of people working in IT is not declining.
No, in fact,
very
recent research
important
demonstrates that there's been no decline between. There was a little article in it was the eSkills Bulletin that between 2003 and 2011 there was no drop in UK IT employment at all.
You wouldn't believe that if you read some of the media articles that actually foretell the decline and end of IT. IT is changing. IT has always changed. The thing is, for BCS, it needs to be ahead of the game to see how it's the profession that it serves and works with is evolving and changing and becoming ever more global in its outlook as well as in practice.
Ironically, I think in our profession, many people in our profession don't like change. No. And you see it again and again, this resistance. And I say, you really are in the wrong job,
Mind you, this is not unusual, is it?
No.
Human beings do tend to be a little bit cautious about change, actually. So
absolutely, but
it just shows we're human.
But I think the problem is that it's changing faster and faster.
Very.
The acceleration of change is just incredible. In my time, that I've been in the profession, which has been a while now, I won't say how long, but it's, I've seen huge amounts of change. I've had to reinvent myself, countless times in order to be relevant.
Yes.
And, if I hadn't done it, I would have gone out with what they, call dinosaurs or whatever it is. But you need to reinvent yourself all the time.
Yes, absolutely you do, and I think I can claim to have more experience than anybody else around the table of doing that. On the other hand, I think you've got to look at change in two ways. My experience is that some change you can manage, but some change you just have to cope with. And it's wise to be realistic and classify change in a sense. Because if it's the sort you've just got to cope with, trying to manage it is doomed to failure. So you really have to be good at analysing how to respond to change as well. And it's not simple. But having the fundamental skills that we talked about earlier on, I can tell you from bitter experience, does definitely help.
Okay. Well, look, thank you ever so much for your input. I'd like to finish off with a couple of interesting recent articles just to back up some of the things you're saying there, actually. First of all, there was something recently, a joint US and UK bit of research that showed that by 2016, about 750,000 jobs in finance, IT and other areas will be offshored. On the other hand, there was recently in CIO magazine, it said that because of the spending in public and private cloud areas, at least 225,000 jobs were created in the UK alone by 2015, just in that area. So swings and roundabouts, that might be the conclusion, mightn't it? Elizabeth, John, Karim, Gary, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.